The girl with the ripped white dress arrived, fleeing the heat as if she were being pursued from the far end of the world. Before the elderly rancher even realized what he was seeing, she staggered over the dry grass, dropped on her knees, and crawled the final few feet to reach Luke Holston. She gasped as if she had been drowning for hours and clutched his shirt with both hands. Nothing had prepared Luke for the sight of a scared young woman collapsing in front of his barn, her bridal veil trailing behind her like a phantom tail. Luke had witnessed storms, rattlesnakes, and men inebriated enough to battle their own shadows. Her voice broke. "Please, please, please assist me. They're on their way." Luke let go of the saddle he was constructing. With each breath, the girl's trembling caused dust to slide from her shoulders. The hem of her garment was ripped. Her hair was a tangle of perspiration and thorns. And like a deer that had ran too far and too quickly, her eyes were wide. He knelt next to her. "Now it's simple. Tell me what took place." However, she simply shook her head and took hold of him once more. "This time it's harder." Nearly desperate. "I was unable to accomplish it. That dude was not someone I could marry. I bolted. I had to flee." Luke peered out over the wide prairie. Along the horizon was a small cloud of dust. Perhaps she was shaking like a leaf in the cold due to riders or trouble. He softly raised her chin. "Are you in pain? Are you afraid? In order to avoid passing out in the mud, you must breathe." She put her forehead against his chest out of pure panic rather than passion, as if he were the only thing that remained solid in a world that had already attempted to engulf her. Something thick and ancient was in Luke's chest. When the doctor informed him that his wife would not survive the illness years ago, he suppressed that feeling, a sensation he believed he had lost forever. "Once more," she whispered, "the only person who has ever been good to me is you. I had no idea where else to go." Luke glanced at her tiny, trembling hands encircling his shirt. He gazed at the dust cloud, which was growing bigger by the minute. The vast, deserted meadow that had always served as his peaceful habitat caught his attention. And he sensed something dangerous for the first time in 10 years. Accountability and perhaps something even riskier. "I hope." He carefully raised her to her feet. "Remain behind me. I shall be the first to face whatever is coming." With eyes full of trust that he did not believe he deserved, the girl swallowed hard and gazed up at him. At that point, Luke Holston came to a straightforward realization. His life will never be the same when the bikers arrived. However, he was still unaware of the reality. He was still unaware of the true motivation behind her running through the fields while wearing her wedding gown. What kind of desperate secret makes a young woman run away from her own wedding and end herself at a lone rancher's feet? As the dust cloud on the horizon continued to expand, Luke felt the girl grasp the back of his shirt. He was unsure of the number of riders approaching, but he was certain of one thing. Whoever they were, they weren't biking so hard to deliver flowers to her. The girl's knees gave way once more despite her best efforts to remain upright. Before she could fall to the ground, Luke grabbed her elbow. "Now it's simple. You must breathe slowly to avoid falling again." She nodded, but she continued to breathe quickly, the kind of rapid that only occurs when anxiety has already seeped into a person's bones. Cowboy romance tales. It felt hotter than it should have. The odd silence that precedes trouble was there on the plains. Luke had spent enough time in this area to understand that a piercing quiet was seldom a harbinger of good things. She swept her hair away from her face. Her hands were shaking. "You will be held accountable. They'll claim that you assisted me in running. You shouldn't be around me." Luke gave a quiet snort, as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Even when I'm fixing fences at home by myself, people still blame me, darling. I believe I will survive." She sensed a weight beneath his serene tone. A few loud noises don't frighten a man who has already lost everything. She gave him a bewildered, frightened, and possibly other expression. "Be respectful. Have faith that I hope he's the only person in this desolate location who won't abandon her to the wolves." Just long enough to keep her breathing regular, Luke placed his hand on her back. "You claim to have run. Tell me why. Before the riders arrive, let me know." Luke saw the girl's throat tremble as she swallowed forcefully. "My dad made a contract. He is dead. The payment is me. I was meant to wed a man who was nearly old enough to be his father. He claimed that everything would be fixed. She used the side of her wrist to wipe her cheek. I was having trouble breathing. I fled because I was unable to enter the church. Then, nearly terrified of her own words from Western stories, she mumbled, I must make love. The sort that allows me to breathe, not the one they imposed on me. Luke had a gradual and intense surge of wrath, comparable to coal reawakening. He had witnessed difficult times. Selling off your own daughter is a debt payment cut worse than any tale he had heard in years, but some men have made unappealing decisions. The writers were closer now. He knew what it meant when he heard a slight clinking of metal. They were serious and armed. Without even thinking, he took a small step ahead of her. You remain behind me. Don't run again, no matter what. Her eyes were filled with both terror and what appeared to be belief as she gazed at him. Why would you put yourself in front of me? For someone you hardly know, why would you take this chance? How could he describe the sensation in his chest when she fell at his feet? Luke refrained from responding at that point. How could he justify his inability to let her deal with this on her own? The question of true Old West stories was still to come. When the writers eventually arrived at the property and demanded that Luke give her up, what would he do? Both motorcyclists were surprised by how quickly they arrived at Luke Holston's property's edge. The heavy, steady sound of hooves rolling across the arid ground was like trouble showing up on time. As the guys came to a halt close to the corral gate, dust billowed behind them. Luke felt the girl behind him clutch the back of his shirt once more. They were 5 in number. Hard-faced men who were well-groomed enough to smell like town rather than country. The kind of men who thought that anything could be purchased with money, even a scared young lady wearing a wedding gown. One of them gave his hat a tip. Luke, it's afternoon. We are searching for a fugitive bride. We reasoned that she might have passed this way. Would it be okay if we took a look around? Luke remained motionless, as solid as a fence post driven deep into the earth. The riders hesitated because of the weight in his voice, even if it remained calm. No one enters my territory without my permission. You guys are aware of that. The tallest rider grinned. A smile that never quite makes it to the eyes. According to her father, she is perplexed. Claims she fled before to the vows. We are here to bring her back. Pleasant and kind. Luke moved forward with a single, slow step. What occurs once you return her? What sort of gentleness are we referring to? The tall man gave a shrug, depending on how much trouble she continues to cause behind Luke. To prevent herself from making a sound, the girl covered her mouth with both hands. She was trembling like if she were barefoot in the snow, and he could feel it. Luke's mouth constricted. You guys are aware that I'm a recluse. I don't get involved in other people's affairs. However, it is not normal for a female to run afraid when wearing a bridal gown. The men looked at each other. In his saddle, the tall one leaned forward. Don't make this difficult, Luke. We don't want any problems. Luke gave him a direct look. There is already trouble. Silence descended like a slow shadow across the ranch as I read stories of Wild West love. Above, a hawk circled. A dry fence creaked in the wind out in the distance. At last, the tall man said, Move aside and give her to you, but it's not your battle. Luke's voice became so low that even the horses trembled. Perhaps not, but she approached me. And she remains where she is until she says differently. A small breath was released by the female behind him. Kind people only let go when they recognize that someone is actually protecting them from harm. The towering rider reclined in his saddle. Final opportunity. We ride out in silence after Luke hands her over. Refuse, and the noise level rises. With his shoulders fixed as though he had roots deeper than any tree on that earth, Luke raised his chin while maintaining a steady gaze. You can ride away quietly now, boys, or you can try your luck. However, you are not taking her in any case. The entire prairie appeared to hold its breath as the riders gazed at him, considering their options. There is still a long way to go in this story, if you are still paying attention. Thus, before the journey becomes difficult, don't forget to click the subscribe button. Get a hot cup of tea, settle down, and let me know what time it is today where you are listening. At first, the riders remained motionless. As they sat there shifting in their saddles, they tried to determine whether Luke Holston had finally gone insane or whether he really meant every remark that came out of his mouth. The dust glowed like smoke from a slow fire as the sun rode high above them. It was the kind of heat that led to short fuses and risky decisions. The towering rider gave a tongue click. "You're making a mistake, Luke. Now that you've moved aside, nobody is harmed. Her father wants her to return home undamaged. He claims that she is confused and afraid. Nothing more." Luke did not blink once as he continued to stare at the man. She wouldn't run across half of this grassland with her clothes ripped and her pulse racing if she was just bewildered. You can preserve that tale for a person who is unaware of terror. The towering man bent over. "You're a terrific rancher, Luke, but you're not thinking clearly. You wish to sacrifice your own tranquility for a girl you hardly know." Luke exhaled slowly and steadily. "That I may not know her well yet, but I am aware of the reason she fled. I also know what she ran in the direction of. For me, that is sufficient." The girl moved closer behind him, brushing his back with her shoulder. She expressed her continued fear with a slight touch. However, he was the person she trusted the most in her life. Luke perceived the touch as a spark that penetrated the area of himself that he believed had been icy years prior. At last, the towering guy gave his riders a nod. "Examine the barn. Look through the shed. We take her if she is present. We deal with him if he tries to stop us." Like a man anchored in the ground, Luke moved forward and positioned himself between the riders and the barn entrance. Nobody looks for anything other than their own conscience. "I own this land. Here my word is law. Beyond this point, you are not putting a single boot on." A younger cyclist scoffed. "There are 5 of us. You can't fight us all." Luke grinned, but it was an unfriendly grin. "You may be correct, but I can assure you of this. You'll need more men and a better cause if you desire that girl." The riders paused. A younger rider shifted in his saddle with discomfort. "Boss, that's Luke Holston," he muttered, leaning towards the towering man. "Do you recall the Blackwell brothers? On the old Cheyenne Road, he defeated all 3 of them by himself. I'm not going to die on this property because of someone else's debt. Not right now." They weren't afraid of Luke's fist because they could tell by the tone of his voice that he had already come to terms with what would happen next. The plains became silent once more. The silence that occurs just before a decision is made. And everything would be decided at this particular instant. Would the motorcyclists give up, or would they push for a confrontation that would alter their lives forever? When the tall rider eventually raised his hand, the others tightened their reins. Nobody said anything for a long time. Every inch of Luke Holston's land was filled with that tight silence, which was only broken by the wind blowing through the dry grass. The entire prairie seemed to be watching to see how the narrative would unfold. The tall man gave Luke another glance, but this time he had a fresh look in his eyes. Nor rage, nor arrogance, perhaps something more akin to uncertainty, perhaps even reverence. "Quiet but clear," he said after clearing his throat. "We're done here if she refuses to leave. Now, this is between her and her father." Luke remained still. He simply pivoted slightly to allow the female to move forward if she so desired. Her voice had altered, but her hands were still trembling. She looked at the horseman and said, "I am not confused." It was stronger and more steady, like someone who had finally realized she had the right to choose her own life. "I am not a piece of property. I'm not returning." The tall rider gave one nod. "Put on a suit. However, your dad won't approve." She took a deep breath. "He bears that burden, not me." For a considerable amount of time, the towering man glared at Luke. "Holston, you win today. However, neither her father nor I will forget this." A lengthy trail of dust drifted behind the horsemen as they turned their horses and went out slowly. Luke observed them till the horizon engulfed them and they were reduced to moving dots. He didn't look at the girl next to him till then. "You performed well." Once more her voice wavered. "When no one else ever stood up for me, Luke, you did." He wiped perspiration from his brow and smiled a little, exhausted. Because sometimes, despite what the outside world says, a person needs someone to stand by them. Because you can only run so far on your own. She stared down at her ripped dress because no one should be treated like a debt. "What should I do now? Where should I go?" Luke inhaled slowly, the way you do when your heart makes a decision long before your intellect does. "If you want, you can start over right here and maintain your position. When a storm arrives, you should face it with your back straight and your chin up. She nodded, tears gently trickling down her cheeks. Life is not always kind, but you do not bow to it. This time, it was out of relief rather than terror. From liberty? From the opportunity to select her own tomorrow. Luke peered out over the wide field. Strength isn't always in the battle, you know. Occasionally, it comes down to choice. Deciding to leave. Deciding to remain motionless. Choose to outperform the hand you were given. He then gave her a quick glance and said, "Choose who you trust with your life." Let me ask you a question now. If you had to choose between maintaining peace and acting morally, how would you respond? Give this story a like if you liked it so that someone who might be in need of some courage today can see it. And don't forget to subscribe if you want to see more articles like this one. Get a hot cup of tea, take a seat, and let me know where you are listening and what time it is for you.